right. We are commencing this meeting of the Sustainable Economy Task Force on Thursday, the 29th of August at 2:10 p.m. And I'm going to go ahead and take roll call. All right, GSD.
Secretary Doucette's here.
Thank you, Secretary. EDD is present. Emnerd.
Hi, I'm Sammy Cow, I'm the new policy director, and I'm present.
Okay. Department of Workforce Solutions.
Okay, present. Raquel Gomez.
Hi, Raquel. Tax and Rev. Okay, present. PED.
Breezy Gutierrez, present.
Great. Chair Poviwa.
I'm here.
Okay, IAD. Okay. Nobody from IAD. Environment Department.
This is me, Ori Harms for Environment Department.
Okay, SIC.
This is John Clark with SIC. Yep, Charles Wallman as well.
Okay, DFA.
Leo Delgado, here.
Okay, State Lands.
Craig Johnson, here.
Okay, and HED. All right. Well, that is quorum. Next will be to approve our agenda.
So moved, Robert Doucette.
Oop, I'm just gonna get it up for you, just a second. There you go. So this was circulated in advance and you'll have access to it in the attachments for the meeting invite as well. Do we have a motion to approve this agenda?
So moved.
Second to secretary's move.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, can you see this? It is the minutes from July 25th. Is it visible?
Yes.
Okay. And you will have had access to these as well. Can I have a motion to approve these minutes?
So
Yeah.
moved.
Second, James.
Who was the first motion?
Robert Doucette.
Okay, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, seeing none, these minutes are approved. Just quickly, I'll say a welcome to some of our new task force members. So in particular, you heard Sammy is here, and we haven't had a chance to do this across the board, but also Francesca is joining us from SIC and has been with us for a few meetings. So we're grateful to have you here. And then we also have some presenters in the room who don't typically join us, but thank you for being here as well. And you'll get introductions to them when we commence our presentation. All right.
Thank you, Chair Matucci, and I also want to welcome the new members and also appreciate that Sammy Cow has taken a new position within EMNERD as policy director. So welcome, Sammy.
Thank you, James.
All right. And you can see this PowerPoint as well.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, well, we're gonna get into our presentations. First, we had on the agenda a welcome from our hosts at the State Lands Office. So would you like to just say a few words?
Sure.
Yeah.
On behalf of Commissioner Stephanie Garcia Richard, welcome everybody. Thank you for your time and for your service to the committee. I can tell you that Commissioner Garcia Richard is extremely committed to diversifying the revenue streams that come into the state land office, and she has initiated several new programs, some of which that we'll talk about here today. But on behalf of Commissioner Garcia Richard, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having us here in your offices as well. Oh, yes, James, I see your hand.
Thank you. I also just want to acknowledge, I'm so sorry. I was very much looking forward to being in person at the Land Commission office today. Unfortunately, was not able to attend in person, but I also just want to really appreciate the Land Commission's office and the commissioners' real devotion to the diversification of the state's economy, and also recognize that we are over dependent on oil and gas production within the state, and it's an important driver to our economy. And I just want to thank the commissioner for her long-term commitment to figuring out how we plan for the future. So thank you so much for hosting us today.
Okay. So to give you a roadmap of what we'll be talking about today and some of our speakers, we're here at the State Lands Office to discuss revenue diversification with several presenters, most of whom are represented on our task force, but not all of whom. And we're excited to pull together a group of people who understand state revenues and can talk to you about all the various aspects of fiscal policy and revenue projections and how those connect to diversifying not just our tax base, but our broader economy. So we'll start with a presentation from the Economic Development Department. We're lucky to have here with us a policy fellow from the Harvard Taubman Center for State and Local Governance, Juan Carlos. And you know me, I'm Kayla Lucero Matusi. I chair this task force and I'm the Just Transition Advisor with the Economic Development Department. Secondly, we will have some presentations from the Consensus Revenue Estimating Group, including Dr. Clavijo and Dr. Delgado. And third, a presentation from the Department of Transportation, who is also, of course, included in the CREG or Consensus Revenue Estimating Group. But we wanted to highlight some transportation-specific themes. So Dr. Michael Morrison is here with us today to present. Fourth, we will have presentations on the State Investment Council's permanent funds, including remarks from State Investment Officer John Clark. And then last but not least, a presentation from our hosts at the State Lands Office. And we have here with us Craig Johnson and potentially the commissioner. So here we go. All right, and I want to just preface that this first section of the presentation contributed by EDD really would not be possible without Juan Carlos's analysis. And we are so lucky to have talented people working with us at EDD to get this work off the ground and give it the importance and attention that it deserves. So there's some original analysis in these slides from Juan Carlos that we will also be utilizing in the statewide strategic plan. And as a summary of why we're all here, I'd like to acknowledge SB 112 and the legislative mandate that we received through SB 112 to diversify the state economy away from reliance on natural resource extraction. And so there's mention of the tax base and state revenues in that legislation, as well as economic diversification. So in this slide, you can see what we think about as the 3 avenues to assuring long-term state revenue. And SB 112 calls out healthcare and education as some of the key public services that we hope to guarantee for the long term through a whole combination of activities. So of course, we can pursue economic diversification to increase revenues and diversify our tax base. We also have what is considered to be fiscal policy best practice in the form of permanent funds and a rainy day fund, colloquially called that. And that yields principle that is vital to our key public services. And then third, taking measures of economic efficiency and improvements in fiscal policy systems can also lead to increased savings. And I just want to note here that for local government finance, the picture is very different. And so we were just in the northwest of New Mexico, for example, talking to some leaders from the Farmington area about the impacts of the San Juan Generating Station and mine closure. And we heard a lot about how the tax base and their fiscal policy mechanisms have been affected by that closure, including the school district and, taxation and all sorts of things, as well as the wages that those workers were collecting and paying into the local economy. So it's very clear that even as we prepare at the statewide level, we will still continue to see that our localities and regions are affected in a different way. And it's important to note that. So this is some analysis that Juan Carlos prepared for this presentation and as we work towards releasing this year's update to the state plan. So on the left, you can see the evolution of revenues over time. And on the right, you can see the evolution of government spending. And you can see that they're roughly aligned. And so as we have seen an increase in revenues, largely due to oil and gas industry in the state, we've also seen an increase in spending. So
Chair, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
And I am just seeing in the chat that folks were asking for activation of the I think translation features, and we may not have done that yet.
There we go. Can we see that now?
Yes, there is the option, and if interpretation is needed, click on the little globe at the bottom of your screen.
Yeah. Thank you so much, James. I apologize, guys. Okay. So let's see here. Yeah, so on the left, you can see the growth rates, the ups and downs of New Mexico state revenues. And on the right, you can see where we rank in terms of revenue volatility. And this is important because up at the top here, you can sort of see what the average is for other states. And you can see that New Mexico has a significantly higher score, not necessarily all the way at the top where Alaska is. Alaska's is far greater than the average, but certainly New Mexico's is close to being top in the nation. So obviously having a lot of revenue volatility relates to factors such as fiscal stability. And in order to prepare long-term for assuring revenues and guaranteeing funds for critical public services, a combination of measures are required. And that includes smart fiscal policy, both through striving for fiscal stability and fiscal resilience, which the second, fiscal resilience is kind of how do we weather shocks to the economy, maybe things that are unforeseen at the global or national scale. And then research has found broadly around the world that having a high degree of fiscal transparency or enabling the public to engage in informed conversations about the state government's fiscal policy choices can lead to better fiscal policy outcomes. And while we are saving for our future, including through the permanent funds and rainy day fund, we are also pursuing economic diversification of our tax base. And so that's important both at the statewide level, but also down to individual regions. And having a more diversified economy means also having a more resilient economy, because you're reducing dependence on, you know, either one or a small number of industries that you derive workforce and revenue from. And I'm going to hand it over now to Juan Carlos.
Thanks, Kayla. So the first piece of the fiscal policy is fiscal stability, which entails proactive planning and mitigating budget volatility. From the map, you can see that New Mexico implements long-term budget assessment and also budget stress test, which puts the state in a better position than other states which implement only one or none. Regarding the stabilization, New Mexico has two tools for smoothing the volatility that we see at the beginning. First, the permanent funds, which were established to ensure that the state benefits from the non-renewable resources beyond its lifetime. And the main funds are the land grant permanent fund and severance tax permanent fund. A percentage of these funds are used every year for earmark expenses or also for the general fund. The second tool that New Mexico has are the automatic stabilizers. First, as a rule, there is the 5-year average that oil and gas revenues above the 5-year average goes to other funds such as Early Childhood Fund. And the second is a limit established by the Senate Bill 26 in 2023, which caps the oil and gas revenue that goes to the general fund. In the next slide, you can see the second piece is fiscal resilience, which depends on revenue sources, sustainable spending choices, and saving for unforeseen challenges. So from the graph, there are two takeaways. The first is that historically, taxes and federal funds has been the main revenue sources for the state. And the second is that rents and royalties have been gaining protagonism and have been gaining relevance in the recent years. Regarding the saving, as Kayla mentioned, New Mexico has this rainy day fund called that can be seen in the general fund reserves. And currently, the balances are estimated in 3.3 billion for this fiscal year 2025, which represents 32% of recurring expenditures. Why the state is saving? For some challenges or increasing challenges such as climate damages. According to Daniel Ramey, which is a renowned researcher in the field, damages can be greater than cost of fossil fuel industry decline. So if we assume a social cost of carbon of 200 per ton, and considering the US emissions, there is an annual damages around $1 trillion. In the next one, we talk about the final piece of the fiscal policy, which is fiscal transparency, which means engaging citizens in deciding how to spend on their true needs. The first critical component is having open fiscal data for the people. New Mexico has its Sunshine portal, as in the federal level. There's also the portal called US Data Spending or US Spending. The second critical component is participatory budgeting, which is community members decide how to spend piece or a portion of the budget in a certain topic. The city of Albuquerque is piloting a program right now, and the state of Rhode Island is using participatory budgeting for health investments. Moving to economic diversification, a diversified economy has multiple strong sectors that it has revenue generation. So from EDD estimations throughout these three key economic variables such as GDP, job share, and personal income, we can see, or we saw that there are 8 main sectors that account more or less for 70% of the economic activity in the States. Clearly, the government is the dominant with one quarter of the activity. Then professional services and healthcare shine because of their consistency throughout the three variables. And even though real estate and mining and oil and gas extraction accounts for a large share in GDP, they don't have such a significant share in jobs and in personal income. Most of these 8 main sectors are also the main contributors for revenues. So at the top, we can see mining and oil and gas, government, and retail trade. At this point, I might say that this is a conservative estimate of the dependency on oil and gas. It's in the middle between an estimate by Daniel Ramey, which accounts for around 50%, and the CREG that also estimated is around 30% of the revenues for oil and gas. Finally, in the next slide, the broad-based economy must not overlook potential local disparities and reliance on single sectors. We use the share of GRT as a measure to show dependency on one source throughout the counties. So darker counties are more reliant on one sector, such as Mora and Hardin countries that they rely a lot in construction. Or for example, in Lee and Eddy County that rely in mining. The other 24 counties rely basically on retail trade based on GRT numbers. If we focus on the fossil fuel counties, which are located in the Permian Basin and the San Juan Basin, we don't only see that there is a great reliance on GRT, but also on property tax. In Lee and Eddy in particular, the above 50% of that tax come from the mining oil and gas and mining activity. So
Yeah,
that's it.
and it's important to add for the latter piece of this that is not likely is a conservative estimate of reliance because of all the indirect ways in which those local and regional economies are dependent upon oil and gas extraction and the larger industry and the business that brings to the region. And so there are some estimates that are far higher, I believe upwards of 90%. And if we just go back here for a second, the last thing I'll note is that these are examples of fiscal transparency. We're by no means advocating for a specific model, but we recognize the general importance of having a transparent conversation with the public about things such as fiscal vulnerability and fiscal risk, because it allows them to have a stake in how we proceed moving forward. And it's also important to note that these are highly complex topics that we find difficult to understand. And so there's I guess a heightened imperative to really make these topics accessible for everyone.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Where you say mining in Eddy and Lee counties, and then you say mining, oil and gas, is there a way to break that down, or do you have that? Because I would almost think of oil and gas as bigger than mining, but maybe I'm wrong.
Well, mining refers to the
Oh,
broad umbrella that
extraction.
includes oil and gas.
Okay.
And so, Juan Carlos, you can say a little bit about this, but we're using the Federal Bureau of Labor Statistics standard.
Okay.
So,
We're using NICE code, and the sector is called mining and oil and gas.
Okay.
Sometimes
gotcha.
it's difficult to break those into different categories because it's at the local and the county level, it's difficult to find reliable data.
Yeah.
yeah,
Gotcha. So the next code would be mining and
Oil and gas.
Okay.
Yes,
great.
correct.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, so now we have some individuals joining us from the CREG. and I will launch into your presentation and you can just let me know when to go to the next slide.
Hello, everyone. Pedro Clavijo here with the New Mexico Taxation and Revenue Department. I'm a senior economist, also a part of the Craig group. For this presentation, we want to start with the general picture for the state. In particular, we want to see what some of the professional forecasters they are expecting for the state in terms of gross domestic product and employment. So essentially what we have here is that the state as a whole here is performing well, it's performing over the previous expectations. You can see that the most recent data showing that the state is outpassing now the previous forecast. And in terms of GDP, well, we have that the economic activity is mainly driven by the usual suspects, retail trade, construction, mining and oil and gas, and manufacturing. In terms of employment, what we can see is also we are outpassing now the previous forecast. The state was able to recover now the job losses after the COVID pandemic. Now we are in a higher position, so we are facing now the future in a better position. Next, please. Now, in terms of revenue, what we have is that the main contributors to tax collections on the left, you can see that retail trade by far is the main contributor. Construction, mining, and oil and gas, these three have been showing strong rates of growth, in particular oil and gas during the fiscal year 23. During fiscal year 24, it grew, but at a lower rate. And here, what we have is that unlike GDP contributions, manufacturing is not showing as a big contributor here. And on the right, what we have is the forecast, what we in the Craig group are expecting. Fiscal year 24 is an estimate, but it came higher compared to the previous forecast. Is showing a 3% rate of growth compared to fiscal year 23. And we are expecting some growth in the near future, but here mainly driven by the oil and gas sector. Next, please. In terms of other contributors to the general fund here, personal income tax and corporate income tax, we are also expecting some growth. In the case of personal income tax, you can see that for fiscal year 24, we are experiencing a drop, but that's just legislative change, in particular with pass-through entities. Now that is gonna be a part of corporate income tax. So personal income tax is expected to decline, but corporate income tax is expecting to increase due to this change. But in general, we are, after this adjustment, we are expecting a growth in these two components. Now I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Leonardo Delgado.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for having us. My name's Leo Delgado. I'm the Chief Economist for DFA, and I'll be covering the next couple slides. So what you see here on this slide is oil and gas emergency school tax revenues on the left side and federal mineral leasing revenues on the right side. And the update during this forecast round to these revenues are mainly a reflection of slightly stronger oil prices in the near term and increased production levels in the August forecast compared to where the group was back in December. But the main impact of these updates aren't reflected in the revenue going to the general fund. In both charts, you see 3 sets of bars. The blue bars are what's allotted to go to the general fund from OGAS and federal mineral leasing revenues. And those are capped. Those are capped due to Senate Bill 26 from 2023, and essentially that bill doesn't let the revenues to the general fund grow anymore. So the updated prices and volumes mainly have an impact on the transfers, which is the next set of bars, the orange bars and the gray bars in both charts. And those mechanisms provide a couple things to the general fund. They stabilize the revenue and reduce its dependence on oil and gas revenue. And 2, increase investments for the state. So the orange bars are a function of 2020's House Bill 83, and that's another stabilizing mechanism. And what it does is it caps off revenues in excess of those 5-year averages, as they were mentioned earlier in the presentation, and it diverts them to the Early Childhood Trust Fund. The second set of bars, which is the gray bars, are a function, again, also of 2023 Senate Bill 26, and what the general fund would have grown by increasing oil and gas revenues to the general fund are now capped, and what that revenue would have grown by is now diverted and invested in the severance tax permanent fund. And those 2 mechanisms provide a great deal of stability to the general fund, decreasing its dependence on oil and gas revenues, and also increasing investments for the state, as mentioned, the Early Childhood Trust Fund and the Severance Tax Permanent Fund, which down the road, as that fund is increased, as that corpus increases, it provides returns back to the general fund, which are much more stable, a source of revenue to the general fund. Next slide, please. And what you see here on this slide is 2 charts. The chart on the left is illustrating that the levels of recurring revenues in that time series, and more importantly, the trend line, the percent change year over year for recurring revenues. And that's what's commonly referred to as the roller coaster ride for New Mexico, because it highlights the impact that oil and gas revenues and its volatility has on total recurring revenues. When you see those downslopes in the percent changes in that time series, those were a function of, in 2020, the onset of the pandemic, but also the collapse in oil prices and drop in oil demand. If we move for a little bit further back to 2016, we had oil prices collapsing there. And then, of course, if we go all the way back to the beginning of the prior decade, even the end of the 2000s, that was the impact of the Great Recession. And so what I'll do here is I'll just give a couple highlights of the Craig's outlook by these categories on the chart on the right side. And you have sales, you have oil and gas revenue, income taxes, and investment income. So general sales, the main impact there is gross receipts. Gross receipts, as mentioned by my colleague, are expected to grow at a moderate pace, but still grow positively. That's a function of consumer resilience, higher wages, transfer payments, leftover savings from the pandemic, but those are slowing, and so general sales is expected to grow slower, but at a positive rate. Next, we have oil and gas revenue, and as you can see in the forecast period, those bars don't change so much. That's revenue to the general fund. And the reason for that is those stabilizing mechanisms that have been instituted in recent years are capping that growth to the general fund, insulating it from some of the volatility and over time decreasing its dependence. The next category we have here is income taxes. And as Pedro mentioned, income taxes, we experience in fiscal year 25, a slight decline, and then we return back to moderate growth for income taxes. And that's not a function of the underlying economic activity, but more so an impact of legislative changes that are influencing both personal income taxes and corporate income taxes. And the last revenue line item we have listed here is investment income. And the two main sources of investment income to the general fund are the severance tax permanent fund and the land grant permanent fund. And the interesting thing in the forecast period for the CREG in this round is investment income is starting to become the greater driver of growth for the forecast. In FY26, investment income is estimated to exceed personal income as the #2 revenue program for the state, providing a more stable, better revenue program to the general fund. So overall, the revenues are projected to grow moderately. There are some risks and volatilities associated with the forecast. There always are, but we're expecting slow, moderate growth for the overall general fund. And that'll conclude my portion of the presentation, and I'll hand it over to whoever's next.
Thank you very much to both of you. Okay, and we're just gonna make sure that our audience online can hear Dr. Morrison. So
Hello, my name is Dr. Michael Morrison. Can you hear me?
Yes.
okay,
Hi, I'm from the New Mexico Department of Transportation. I'd like to first recognize Gisip Siong and Kwaku Boache, who both helped with the presentation and with the research on this. So a quick overview just of NMDOT first. The NMDOT is responsible for about 12,000 lane miles throughout the state. Of those 12,000 lane miles in 2022, the last data was available, 67% of that was considered acceptable. Of that, because of that, the TRIP organization has estimated that the deteriorated roads within New Mexico cost New Mexicans about $3.3 billion in 2023. Of the New Mexico's 4,000 bridges, approximately 4,000 bridges, we've got 5% are considered in poor condition, 60% in fair condition, and only 35% in good condition. The next slide. Now going into a quick overview of funding for NMDOT, we're a little unique among the state's departments in that we receive half our funding from federal funding, about $506 million in FY24, and the other half from the state road fund, which was about $524 million. The state road fund is supplied by several dedicated tax programs, including the special fuel or diesel tax, gasoline tax, weight distance tax, vehicle registration, motor vehicle excise tax, which is the sales tax on vehicles, and then several other related sources. Next slide. Just want to go over kind of the long run forecast for the Department of Transportation. If you see the chart on the left, see a pretty significant decline in revenues for gasoline and special fuels between now and 2050. We're looking at about a 45% decline in gasoline, about a 40% decline in special fuel revenues. That will translate into about a 14% decline in total road fund revenues between 2024 and 2050. Coupled with that, we've got an extra situation. The next slide. Road construction costs are expected to increase by about 138% from 2024 to 2050. In addition to the increasing costs, we are expecting increased need for road construction, repair, and maintenance due to climate change with intense heat, rainfall, or heavy rainfall, forest fires, related flooding and landslide, all expected to increase road degradation, as well as decrease our construction season, so which also would increase our costs. So that kind of brings up to the key takeaways in that already our New Mexico's roads and bridges are in need of intense repair and maintenance. With the transition to alternative fuel vehicles, we're expected to see revenues for the DOT decline quite a bit, as well as cost increases and the need for increased construction, repair, and maintenance due to climate change. That's it for me. I'll pass on to the next.
And just one quick question for you. I mean, because I think we've looked at some numbers about the benefits of investing in climate resilience. And it seems like you're also seeing that in your work as well, because as we make improvements to our infrastructure, oftentimes we're also making investments in climate resilience. So I was just curious if you have any thoughts on that.
I think one of the bigger things we're looking at in terms of resilience is also adapting some newer technologies to try and mitigate the damages due to heat, extreme heat, which is surprisingly a pretty big factor in degrading roads throughout the state. Using different types of asphalt and new formulations are hopefully getting in that. And that as we work to repair the bridges and roads, we're keeping an eye on just climate change resilience and how do we adapt to some of the expected changes and what's happening for changes in weather patterns and so on.
Yeah.
If that addresses one.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking that infrastructure improvement nowadays doesn't just have to capture the needs that it did before, but is also infrastructure adaptation.
Exactly. Yes,
Yeah.
that's absolutely a big part of our.
Yeah, so now we'll have a presentation from John Clark about the SIC's work and the permanent funds. So we'll go to you, John.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for inviting me today. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person. I'd like to recognize two of my colleagues here at SIC that are also joining me remotely. Charles Woolman, who's our Director of Communications and Client and Legislative Affairs. And Francesca Marati is also with us. She's our Communications Strategist and Special Projects Coordinator. The first two presentations had a little bit of overlap with what I'm planning to cover, so I'm going to try to skip through those sections pretty quickly so that I don't duplicate any of the great points that were already made. So if we could go to my presentation and go to the second slide of it. Let's see. We need to go a little farther through the slide deck. Let me try to find what slide number mine starts on. I'm not seeing my presentation actually in your slide deck.
So John, we sent out an email that we had condensed them all for brevity into one main deck. But if you want, we can even stop share and you could share your screen with yours if that's more comfortable.
That would be great, because that'd be great. I'm not seeing my actual slides in the deck. So if you could allow me to share my screen, that'd be perfect. Let's see here. Let me go to slide.
Yeah, so you should have sharing permissions now.
Okay, let me figure out how to slideshow. No.
I may have one here, John. Let me give it a shot. Send a request.
We just approved it.
Okay.
Yeah, we can see that.
Perfect, okay. Thanks, and Charles, if you could go to the next slide. Perfect. So as noted, the funds that we manage, in particular the permanent funds, are having a significant impact on the budget, and especially moving forward, they're going to have more and more of an impact. Here, we wanted to highlight in particular the impact that we're already having on funding for K through 12 education and early childhood program education, early childhood program funding. So you can see both in the tables and the bar charts at the right that now in fiscal year 2025, we are providing through the distributions that we're making 27% of the funding for all K through 12 education and 58% of all funding for early childhood program budgets. So that's significant, and that is just one example of how the funds that we manage are taking revenues that are available today and making them available not just in a more stable way, but in increase over time. And we're going to see that in some additional charts coming up later, that in addition to stability, we're bringing increased revenues back to the general fund. But what we're starting to see here is an increase in the number of trust funds that are being set up by legislators. The Early Childhood Education and Trust Fund was set up just a few years ago, and we're projecting that it's going to have roughly $10 billion in it within the next couple of years, and able to pay for early childhood programming for many, many years to come. Charles, if you could go to the next slide. So you can see here some of our funds that we manage. I'm not going to go through each of these in detail, but most of these ones on this page have been in place for many years. Again, the one that is more recent is the Early Childhood Education and Care Fund. But these, again, are trust funds that take unstable revenue sources, invest them, and provide stable revenues back to the general fund on the back end, and grow them through our investment income. If we could go to the next slide.
That's next.
So this slide primarily has our newer and smaller funds. You can see at the bottom, those are the 3 new ones that we just got this year. So we now manage 12 different funds. We had 9, but we got these 3 new ones: the Workforce Development and Apprenticeship Trust Fund, Higher Education Trust Fund, and the Capital Development and Reserve Fund. And again, we're providing this information for you to have. I'm not going to go through each of these in detail. But again, we are already fielding additional requests from legislators during this interim about the possibility of creating additional funds to set aside surpluses of today for the long-term needs of the state. We could go to the next slide. So, we've talked about the revenue issue of oil and gas. And what I want to highlight here is the issue of revenue replacement versus economic diversification. So we've heard for a long time how dependent New Mexico's general fund is on oil and gas revenues, and it varies significantly from year to year. But in general, we tend to get over 30% of our general fund revenues from both direct and indirect sources associated with oil and gas. In some years, it exceeds 35%. But it's not really an economic diversification issue. Certainly, there are some local communities that are highly dependent economically on the oil and gas industry. But statewide, it represents about 3% of total employment. And we're really looking at a state issue, not of economic diversification, but of revenue. And so we need a revenue solution to this revenue problem. And we'll take you to the next slide to talk about that. So here is how our permanent funds are able to tackle this from a revenue perspective. And again, I'm not going to go through this in detail because the first 2 presentations already discussed Senate Bill 26 from last year. But this really was landmark legislation passed by the legislature and signed by the governor that dramatically reshapes how New Mexico is going to be able to pay for all of its needs for decades to come. I really can't overstate the importance of this legislation. And the graph on the left has already been highlighted in the first two legislations, but again, it just shows in the blue bars, the light blue bars, the initial windfall that went to the Early Childhood Education and Care Fund. And then the yellow bars are showing how that surplus is now being shifted to the Severance Tax Permanent Fund. And that both provides us more revenue now to invest for the long term, but it also helps immediately stabilize revenues to the general fund. And on the chart on the right, you can see our projected distributions from the Severance Tax Permanent Fund back to the general fund over the years, and we ran this out through FY50. We are going to be providing more detail on these projections when the Craig finishes their updated long-term revenue estimates next month. But for now, this is what we have available. I don't want to get into really specific numbers because we are waiting on those updated revenue estimates. But you can see the incredible increase in distributions from the Severance Tax Permanent Fund back to the general fund from the starting point of fiscal year 2022 to present, and then out to 2050 in the long run. So this is, again, a way not just of providing stability, but a way of providing increased revenues back to the general fund over time. If we go to the next slide. So this is another way of looking at the issue. So traditionally, New Mexico has had a three-legged revenue stool of sales taxes, primarily GRT, income taxes, and then severance taxes, rents, and royalties. And severance taxes, rents, and royalties are essentially the direct revenues associated with oil and gas, but there's also some of that baked into the sales taxes as well. But those really were your three largest revenue sources. And in FY24, our distributions from the permanent funds back to the general fund totaled about 12%, still significant, but not quite enough to be another leg in this three-legged stool. But on the right-hand side, you can see that by 2050, we're estimating that our distributions from the permanent funds will be nearly a third of all general fund revenues, just behind sales taxes and head of income taxes. You can also see there in the red segment that the projection is that severance taxes, rents, and royalties will have dropped down to be 9% by that point. Now, the key here is not just that the permanent fund distributions will be growing as the revenues received through severance taxes, rents, and royalties will be declining. We're not just offsetting it. We are projecting that we are likely to be able to more than offset it, given most scenarios of the gradual decline in oil and gas revenues to the state. Certainly, if someone came in tomorrow and just turned off the spigot of oil in the state, we wouldn't be able to offset that. But we use a variety of estimates from economists, from the oil and gas industry on what they see are the most likely scenarios for oil production in New Mexico for the coming decades. And under most of those scenarios, we're going to be able to more than offset that loss and provide a stable and growing financial future for the state to build from. We can go to the next slide. So that's what we're doing in terms of revenues, but we also want to be able to help with the economic diversification issue, because that clearly is also an issue that the state needs to tackle. So we have ways that we are already doing that through our economically targeted investments here at the SIC, or we refer to them as ETIs. And here, rather than just doing what we do with most of our portfolio, which is seeking the highest risk-adjusted returns, here we're able to seek essentially a bottom line, a double bottom line of both financial returns as well as job creation and industry promotion. The largest ETI program that we have is the New Mexico Private Equity Investment Program. And this was created over 30 years ago. It's evolved a lot over time, but the goal has always been very clear and is in statute. And we have that here for you on the slide. But we've renewed our emphasis on targeting hard science assets in New Mexico for commercialization. And we're really trying to target these frontier technologies that have the ability to be transformative and that New Mexico already has assets in. We could switch to the next slide. These are the frontier technologies that we're focused on. These are technologies being researched at our labs and our universities. And they mostly boil down to energy, AI, aerospace tech, and next generation hard science. And our goal here is to take the research that's being done in the state, combine it with founders, and then marry them with established entrepreneurs. You know, that's something that New Mexico historically does not have a lot of. The state has done an incredible job over the years of recruiting businesses to New Mexico. We've done a great job of helping businesses that were already well established grow. But one thing that the state is, I'm glad to say, paying more attention to, and including our agency at SIC paying more attention to, is how do we help build the entrepreneurial ecosystem? And one of the things that we need is more established entrepreneurs. And we're focusing on ways that we can both bring in established entrepreneurs from around the country, as well as help grow them here at home. If we can go to the next slide. So this slide shows what we've been investing in over the last 2 years. You can see in the bottom right corner that we've put over $500 million into venture capital programs focusing on early stage companies just in a 2-year period. So it's a pretty incredible investment that we're making. And we're doing it in a variety of ways. Partly we're investing into traditional venture capital companies. To some extent, venture capital companies that are based here in New Mexico and have roots here, but also more and more we're working with national venture capital companies that have a track record of success, because venture capital is hard. There's a huge dispersion in results between the top and bottom performers. And so it's critical to attract people here who have been there and done that, both in terms of entrepreneurs themselves, but also in terms of the venture capital companies. But also what we're doing is we're working to fund venture studios like America's Frontier Fund and Roadrunner, and incubators and accelerators with strong track records. Again, trying to take technologies, either bring in outside experienced entrepreneurs or help mentor new entrepreneurs here and build businesses here. And we're trying to grow the bench in New Mexico gradually by bringing in this outside expertise and by working through emerging New Mexico-based managers like Tramway and Dangerous Ventures. If we can go to the next slide. So we're not the only ones in this space. This slide is intended to highlight others that are working in this space, which helps diversify the state's strategies. So first we have listed here the SBIC, the Small Business Investment Corporation. They have an allocation of 2% of our severance tax permanent fund, and they essentially provide meat and potatoes small business loans via loan partners. And they serve hundreds of small businesses with these low-cost loans. Then we have the New Mexico Finance Authority, which has $50 million via legislative appropriations. And they have a greater focus on impact and serving underrepresented and minority-focused businesses and communities. Then we have SSBCI, the State Small Business Credit Initiative. This is federal money of about $74 million, and it's equity and debt spread over several years. And it's being run by NMFA in collaboration with EDD. And this program is focused a little less on financial returns and trying more to focus on impact and on leveraging those federal dollars. And SIC is coordinating efforts with NMFA and EDD on these investments. As I mentioned, our economically targeted investment program has existed for over 30 years. And we're not doing it in the same way that we used to. We have made mistakes in the past. We are working with these other groups so that we can share some of the mistakes that we've made. And also they can find investments that either complement investments that we're making or that don't fit our hard science focus. So this is how we're trying to both help build our entrepreneurial ecosystem, help diversify our state's economy, at the same time that we're focused on the highest possible returns for the majority of our portfolio to provide the stable financial platform for the state to grow. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, John. I think, James, I see your hand up. You can chime in quickly, and then I think we're going to save questions for the end after that.
Yeah, we can go ahead and do that. Let's go with that.
Okay, cool. Well, we will share screen again, and our final presentation is from the State Lands Office. Yeah. Ooh. There.
All right, my name is Craig Johnson. I'm the Director of the Office of Renewable Energy, an office that was created by Commissioner Garcia Richard when she came into office. Hopefully, everybody can hear me online. So just to give a little bit of background and set the table a little bit about the State Land Office. As territories in the West became states, the federal government granted these states land to support their public schools and other institutions. And most states have a board or a governor appointed land commissioner. Here in New Mexico, we have a statewide elected land commissioner, as well as Washington and states like South Dakota, where I'm from, have an elected land commissioner, but most of them are appointed by the governor or board. And South Dakota, for example, got 2 sections out of every township when it became a state, but Arizona and New Mexico, the feds deemed us to have more arid land, so we actually got 4 sections out of every township, which is typically 2, 16, 32, and 36, if you're familiar with the township and range grid. And old timers that have more gray than me refer to those as school sections. So if you hear that, that's what that's a reference to. Next slide, please. Here on the left, you see the typical land ownership maps that you'll see throughout the West, with BLM land being in the yellow, Forest Service in the light green, and state trust land shown in blue there. The blue means we have both the mineral and the surface estate. The light brown, that you'll see some of that in the Permian, where we only hold the mineral estate, is because the state trust land cannot dispose of mineral estate to any entity other than the Department of Interior. So when we do a BLM land exchange, then we can convey and receive mineral estates through that mechanism. But to the right is the beneficiary allocation. Obviously, the vast majority is common schools or public school system. We have 22 beneficiaries, some of which are completely funded by the revenues that are generated by the state trust. Next slide, please. Now here you see our growing revenue picture. We first cracked $1 billion in revenue in 2021. And with the FY24 revenues, that amounts to over 10 billion in revenues from Commissioner Garcia's term, her tenure, and you can see a nice sign out in front of our building to commemorate that achievement. And to the left to the right there is a myriad of activities that we're pursuing to diversify our revenue streams. Renewable energy and commercial development are probably the 2 with the greatest potential, and I'll speak to renewables more in a bit. But in terms of commercial development, just want to let folks in this group know that we have lands on the periphery of almost every community in New Mexico. We have large developable tracts in the Albuquerque Metro, in the Rio Rancho Metro. We just sold a big tract of land for the Cleveland Heights development right next to Sioux Cleveland High School. And in Las Cruces, we have an enormous footprint down in Las Cruces. It's going to hard to do any large scale development in Las Cruces without being on state trust land. So that's definitely an exciting revenue opportunity for us. I won't read this whole list to you, but I will say a little bit about a few of these. Outdoor recreation is one that I participate in on a weekly basis. But from the State Land Office lens, it's not a huge revenue generator yet. For example, we have an easement for the Continental Divide Trail. We have a disc golf park in Silver City that I designed that we leased to Western New Mexico University. Those leases and those rights of ways generate some money. They definitely generate more than what we were getting on a grazing lease. They're not large comparatively, but what I would say about outdoor rec is the spinoff of those activities and people, renting hotels and paying for gas and buying meals and things like that is where you really see the impact of outdoor rec, which is considerable for New Mexico. The last thing I'd mention on this list is number 7, just to give an example of how we can leverage those investments. There was a company called MCOR that located on state trust lands down at the Sandia Science and Tech Park that you may have been familiar with. Well, the State Investment Council invested in an early stage company, I think it was called MOD, that eventually became MCOR. Now MCOR is left to New Jersey, but we have a new tenant in their facility, and so we're still getting rent on that down in Sandia Science and Tech Park. But my point about that example is there was an instance where the SIC received a return from their investment, and from the same project, the land office is receiving a return from our lease. So it's really a double stream of income coming to the state if we can leverage those kinds of opportunities. Next slide, please. So here I'm gonna start talking about renewable energy, and I'm gonna pass out maps to the folks that are here in the room. Kayla, I think this kind of handout will really increase participation in person for the next meeting. But if anyone online wants a copy of these maps, please get a hold of me. They're on our website, and happy to share our successes with you. But here you see the growth of renewables at the State Land Office. In fiscal year 19, renewables earned about $800,000. Last fiscal year, FY 24, we earned $4.5 million. And by the time I retire in 5 to 7 years, we'll be talking about tens of millions of dollars annually from renewables. So it's not huge, but it's not insignificant either. And we continue to see great demand for state trust lands. They're strategically located. The demand that I see in my office basically follows transmission development. And there was a great article on New Mexico's wind program in Power Engineering, an industry publication lately. So I can happy to share that with you all too, if you want those links. And to the right
Sure,
of the
and I was
slide.
just gonna say, I hope we can extend your retirement. This is out of, a call for, on behalf of New Mexico and keeping our capacity. And I'm sure you're going to enjoy, your retirement, but don't leave.
Well, that's very kind of you. Thank you. I hope to have made a contribution by the time I'm done for sure. So to the left is some of our main developers that we're working with. I'm sure all of you have heard of SunZia. It's a huge project by Pattern Energy. They began full construction on the 3,515 megawatt SunZia wind facility. That's the largest wind facility, not only in America, but in the entire Western Hemisphere. And they worked collaboratively with me and my team to develop those plans, and we've reviewed and approved them. And SunZia transmission line is gonna take the power to market. And there's over 2,000 workers on the SunZia wind and transmission line right now. Two other projects that are newer than SunZia and Pattern are the lease to EDF Renewables and Interjex Renewable Energy, which is a Canadian company. These two leases cover over 36,000 acres of state trust lands. And we had 5 or 6 competitive bidders on each of those projects, which is a new thing for the State Land Office. It speaks to the demand for state lands. Prior to these two projects, we often had only one person show up at the auction, but we had 5 and 6 for these last ones. So it's getting more and more competitive. We also have a dozen leases that are participating in New Mexico's inaugural community solar program. So those are 5 megawatt projects that are going to be developed here in coming years, and they're scattered throughout the state as well. Last slide, please. So you can see that the New Mexico State Land Office is a major player in efforts to diversify and improve New Mexico's economy. We feel great. The money that we make goes to a good cause, our public school systems and other great institutions. And we have well-positioned land around nearly every community in the state. We have different leasing mechanisms that we can work with. If you have a manufacturer or someone that wants to come in this state, we can do long-term leasing to municipalities and counties for 40 years without having to go out to bid. So a county could set up an economic development park and then sublease to this hypothetical tenant that I'm discussing now. So I just say we have a lot of tools in the toolbox to accommodate people that want to come to New Mexico and locate on state trust lands. And lastly, what I'll say with respect to renewable energy, we have 2.5 gigawatts of capacity. That's roughly equivalent to PNM's load on state trust land right now. And as transmission develops in the northeast part of the state, where the best wind resources in our state, we're going to see even greater demand coming on. So lots of good things have happened and lots more on the way with respect to renewable energy on trust lands. That's it for me.
Thank you very much. So I'd love to open it up to task force discussion. Do we have any comments or questions? James, I know that you had one. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Lucero Matusi. Thank you all for the presentations. And I apologize that I'm not on screen today or in person. I had some tech issues. I think that this is an incredibly important conversation, and speaks to the role of this task force. I chair the advisory council for the task force, which is all volunteer. In addition to community advisory council that has been all volunteer, for the first couple of years of this effort, we didn't have dedicated staff. And I really want to commend Kayla taking on the role that she has at the Economic Development Department, because I really feel like we're starting to make some headway here. She, in particular, has a significant set of skills around economic development that has really advanced this effort. And I also want to just thank all the task force members and though some of our council members might be attending, most of them are not here today. All of the advisory council members are community folks that are volunteering their time. And so I appreciate that people have had patience in this process. And I'm looking forward to, what we can do moving forward. And this also speaks to, I think, the kind of scarcity mindset that unfortunately I think we end up leaning into as a state. From our volunteer state legislature down to also the immense amount of work that you all have as advocates and professionals within our state agencies. I think there is a real challenge for us to be able to attract and retain talent within our state agencies, both from the secretary level all the way down throughout the staff. And so I just want to thank all of you for being real advocates for the state of New Mexico. This task force is mandated to create a path forward away from over dependency on the extractive industry. I really appreciate John Clark in your new role, and I really appreciated and enjoyed the presentation you gave around revenue diversification. And I think that is such an incredibly important part of this task force and bring together multiple voices from various agencies to be able to tackle this problem. Because I believe that in 50 years, if we don't figure out this problem, our state will unfortunately be in a terrible situation. And I know that we all believe that we want a thriving New Mexico, and are committed to addressing that problem. So I did have a couple questions around revenue diversification and attracting new economic development to the state. Is there a particular lens that folks are applying? Just yesterday, Representative Day Hoffman Vigil convened a listening session around infrastructure and being able to have the right infrastructure for us to be able to attract clean energy, sustainable economic development in the state. I think a big part of that, and this is maybe my broader question, is what kind of lens are being applied around co-benefits to the communities that these industries are being parked in. And I know that's a very broad question, but I'll just throw it out there. And I'm happy to clarify that if it's not clear.
And sorry, James, can you clarify who you were directing that question to?
Thanks, John. And since you raised your hand, I'll ask you.
Sure. So at this point, we're really focused with our economically targeted investment program on just trying to build the entrepreneurial ecosystem that exists across the state, but it is frankly rather fractionalized at the moment. We are trying to work better together with all of the other people in the system because there are a lot of great people in New Mexico trying to make our entrepreneurial ecosystem work. And so, we're working, I think, better than we ever have been with the Economic Development Department, with NMFA, with our universities and community colleges on this. But yeah, there's a long way to go to get to the point where we are all acting cohesively and strategically. We're on the path to doing that, but this is, frankly, one of the three legs of the economic development stool that had never received as much attention as recruiting businesses or helping established companies grow. So we're finding our way through this. We're looking at what has worked well elsewhere and trying to see who has done this successfully where their communities benefited significantly from it. Because we don't just want investment dollars, we want to see that community benefit. And so we're looking at examples like Utah that had developed a program like this to see how did they do it, why did it work so well there, and can we bring elements of that to New Mexico? So we're exploring that actively right now.
That's excellent. Thank you, John. I really appreciate that response. And I think to dig down just slightly deeper, I'm really interested in what are we doing to remove barriers for tribal entrepreneurs, right? Or people of color, marginalized communities to be able to be competitive within the entrepreneurial space.
I think one thing that New Mexico really needs is we need more mentorship for our entrepreneurs. So again, as I mentioned, New Mexico doesn't have a history of having extremely successful entrepreneurs. We have a lot of entrepreneurs, but they create very small businesses, typically with very small impacts.
Some of our best entrepreneurs leave the state.
and some of them absolutely have. So that's an issue of gaps in the capital deployment system. So we need to both make sure that there is capital available at every stage that a company needs it, and that's something that we're working on with partners like the Frontier Fund and Roadrunner Studios. We just at SIC this past Tuesday approved giving each of those two entities $50 million, and one phase takes them from pre-seed through early seed stage funding, and then the other one takes them through Series A and B stage funding. And that's where we've lost a lot of these companies along the way, is because we didn't have funding at every stage that they needed it. So we're working with partners to try to make sure that we have funding at every stage, but also they're taking people who have a great idea, bringing them in and training them how to be a successful entrepreneur. And that's what we need, and that's going to make it more available to the very diverse population that New Mexico has, is by providing that training, that mentorship, so that anyone can figure out how to be a highly successful entrepreneur. If they just have a great idea that seems to make market sense, then here's an ability to enter into this network and get funding and get help along the way to build that successful company.
Thanks, John. I really appreciate that, and I hope we can connect more on this. I do have one quick follow-up question since I have your ear for the moment. Could you speak to whether or not the State Investment Council is, has any thoughts around community benefits agreements? I take, for example, Intel from, its original inception back in Rio Rancho. They were required to have local hiring quotas. And if they didn't meet those, then to pay a certain amount back to the community. And I think that that has been successful. And I also am very excited. Intel has been incredibly important industry for the state and locally in Rio Rancho and Bernalillo County. And moving forward, right? So that has been a good relationship. Community benefits agreements. What are your thoughts on that, John?
I'm a huge proponent of community benefit agreements. I think they can be a critical tool for helping build the community ecosystem in ways that both include economic development beyond just the development of that company, but also go well beyond that. Obviously, everyone's very well aware of the impacts that Intel has had on the high school system in Rio Rancho, just as one example. That's not something that we get into here at SIC because we don't make investments directly into companies. We go through funds, but from an economic development lens, I think any really significant project, that's something that the state and the community should be looking at is how do we ensure that they're going to be good corporate citizens for New Mexico and for the community and help the rest of the state and the rest of the community get lifted up along the way.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Dennis, I see your hand up.
Sure. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, super. So I think James's original question revolved around infrastructure and how you encourage growth and manage infrastructure. What I'll point out is the Water Trust Board, the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, and several legislative appropriations require a couple of things for funding. One is a 40-year water plan that has to be developed by region, submitted to the Interstate Stream Commission for review and approval and acceptance. And with respect to the Water Trust Board and Clean Water State Revolving Fund, and actually as well as the Safe Drinking Water State Revolving Fund, they require these municipalities or these utilities requesting funding to have an asset management plan in place so that they're managing their assets, looking at replacement, looking at planning. There is a tool that not many municipalities have developed within the state, and that is the utilities master plan. And that would involve their capabilities or capacities with respect to water, wastewater, if they own their own electrical distribution system or natural gas distribution system. It would involve looking at the capacities and the look forward for development, as well as renewables and broadband. You could include all that, and the legislature or the folks in this room could advocate to the legislature that similar to the Water Planning Act, similar to incorporating a requirement for an asset management plan prior to receiving funding, that prior to also receiving funding, these utility master plans could be a requirement for receiving future funding. And I think if a corporation or factory plant was coming into an area and had a utility master plan that knew what the capabilities were for wastewater, for energy, for broadband, as well as water by different portion of a city, a municipality, or a county, they could make a much more educated decision on whether they could move forward with development, bringing in an industry or plant, or if the city needed more work. So it's just a thought, but I thought I'd throw that out there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dennis. Are there any other task force comments? Because we're running up on time here. So I may move us to the next agenda item, but any last thoughts? Or any of our presenters as well? No, okay. Well, in closing, I'll just underscore, obviously it took a lot of different people to compile a presentation like this, which just stresses that this is an issue we can't visualize just from one vantage point, really. The future of state revenues and the state economy involves multiple agencies and entities, and understanding it even from a data and projections perspective is complex. And as Dr. Morrison mentioned earlier, certain factors such as climate damages are going to come into the picture and impact our spending. For example, could have massive and unanticipated impacts on the state budget. So we're planning for a whole range of factors and multiple contingencies, and I hope you all can see that you know, we need to draw upon expertise from so many different entities to understand this issue. So we appreciate our presenters, your time, your expertise, and thank you for being here. Next on our agenda, I believe we have some updates from Chair Fobiwa about the outcome of our special meeting on August 15th. And we can keep that brief and then we'll go to public comment because I know we're over time already.
Yes, that sounds good. Thank you, Chair Lucero Matusi. And I wonder if you have the PowerPoint. I can do it very briefly.
I actually don't, because we're on the state lands tech over here, so you may just have to give that overview verbally. I can also bring up the minutes.
No,
Do
I'm
you want
happy
me
to
to
do
bring
that.
up the minutes from the last? Yeah,
That sounds good.
okay, perfect.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So, earlier this summer, Kayla and myself, but really largely due to Kayla's drafting, we did a report, short memo that is on the Economic Development Department's website. And we probably put that up here. Thank you, Kayla. Reviewing what the task force and the advisory council has accomplished since its inception in 2021. I want to really highlight that up until this I guess like late last year, we did not have a dedicated staff to this task force and the advisory council. And we also, you know, in legislation, as is often done, we had to some degree an unfunded mandate to, you know, accomplish a very big task. So I'm so glad that we have Kayla and a dedicated staff member to, you know, support the efforts of this council, the task force. And in reviewing what we've done, and that review actually was pretty significant. I know that Kayla had to suffer through listening through all of the task force and advisory council videos, which I have sometimes for myself said death by 1,000, because I'm not a very good public speaker, ums and buts. So I I think that was a significant task for her to listen through. But the point being that we have done a significant amount of outreach to community and advise agencies throughout the state. and I think we're well positioned to move forward. And the advisory council, the community advisory council had a special meeting on August 15th, and we voted to support the recommendations from this memo, which I invite you all to take a look at when you have some time. And I will just point out the highlights or the significant recommendations that we're making, and that is to create an office that is dedicated to this effort within the Economic Development Department. And to ensure that that department is funded to be able to, accomplish these goals. That I believe includes additional FTEs, and then also the ability to hire the appropriate consultants to do, numerous things, including data analysis and research. And then the third thing is to fund community outreach, because I think as New Mexicans, we believe that everything needs to be centered within our communities. And if we are thinking about how we're advancing throughout the next 50 to 100 years, away from the extractive industry, that really needs to be built off of the voices of our community members throughout the state. So the advisory council is recommending this to the task force. I have also made this recommendation to the economic development secretary. And so I hope that we can move this forward, especially as we're going through the state budget process, and we're approaching a 60-day session. I invite any questions that you all may have in follow-up, and that's the quick roundup of where SEEK has landed.
Okay, and at this point, since we've gone through everything, why don't we open it up to public comment, which can include our advisory council and task force members, but I also want to provide an opportunity to anyone in the audience who might have questions about anything that we've discussed today. Okay, and we have one advisory council member here with us in person, so thank you, Patricia.
Hi, Patricia Knight, and I'm a member of the advisory council. I also work at the Arrowhead Center, New Mexico State University, and formerly worked in the Economic Development Department. I learned a lot today, and the budget is very complex. I do have two questions, one to the land office, and when you spoke about the leases, and you were speaking specifically about outdoor rec, but this may also apply to the alternative energy. Are we making more revenue? I know it's layering in some cases, but we're making more revenue on the lease than the venture itself. I mean, you had some pretty big numbers on alternative and where I'm going with that is, are any of those companies turning revenue back into New Mexico in a significant manner?
Yes, you bet. Great question. Thank you for that. So for the renewable energy side of things, we charge flat fee upfront, which is typically $4,000 per megawatt of installed capacity. And then we have an override, which is 4% of their gross revenues. So if they do better, we do better. A lot of their PPAs are kind of set for long term, and the rates that they charge don't change for out years. But definitely, if they exceed that 4,000 per megawatt, we get 4% of whatever is over that.
Gotcha. Okay, fantastic.
Yep.
And related to grazing and, gaining more revenue with outdoor rec than grazing, just expressing a concern about our cattle industry and the need for food and the future of food security in America. How do you guys weigh that?
For sure, we like to have multi-use, that's our goal. So cattle and ranching go really well with wind energy. A
Gotcha.
little bit less so with solar because it becomes hard to graze, but sometimes there can be agrivoltaics and pollinator species planted in the rows. There's things you can do along that line. But even with oil and gas, we have renewable energy leases on top of oil and gas operations where there's little drill pads set aside, drill islands, so that both can, and a lot of the renewable energy down in the Permian is to serve the oil and gas industry.
Yes.
So, yeah, we definitely try and get everybody to play nice in the sandbox, as I like to say.
Perfect, perfect. And I have one more question for State Investment Council. The question about impact investments. Can you clarify, Mr. Clark, a little bit about that? What those impacts need to be? What are you looking for there?
Sure. So historically, and first of all, good to see you, Patricia.
Thanks.
So historically, we just looked at the number of jobs that were created. What we're starting to do now is take a look at both jobs that are created, but also at what is the entire fiscal and economic impact to the state as a result of this. So, what are we getting back as a state in terms of any potential tax revenues from these companies? What are we getting back in terms of not just jobs, but spending in the community to help support additional businesses? So that's what we're starting to take a look at. And we're in the process right now of going back and reviewing our historical results through that lens. And we intend to do the same moving on into the future to examine results as we go along through that lens of what jobs are we getting, what's the economic impact, and what's the fiscal impact.
Thank you. And just to follow up to that, John, do you have a matrix?
I guess I need some clarification on what you're looking for.
Yeah, no, I mean, I mean, do you have a screen for folks that are applying for the funds? And are those questions asked in that like screening?
So we handle it in terms of essentially a narrative basis in the current setting, because we don't make direct investments into companies. So we have discussions with the funds that we work with about what sort of projects are you going to work on with New Mexico? What does this look like? What are you thinking you could bring to the state? We're not able to really evaluate those because we don't have access at that point to the company's financials and everything. So it's as we go along, we will continue evaluating this. And so it's a tool for us to see, are we on the right track with our programs, or do we need to make a shift? And with the work we've done so far, going back and analyzing historical results, the team had already started to make a shift before I came on board. And the analysis that we're doing now shows that shift was warranted because the results were frankly subpar for how this program had been run years ago. And we're shifting now to this new model and where we're trying to pay more attention to making sure that either experienced entrepreneurs are involved or that we're mentoring people to become experienced entrepreneurs and making sure that there is capital available across the spectrum. Because the way we did it before just did not work very well. So it's not something we can use prospectively to say, yes, we're going to invest with you. No, we're not going to invest with you. It's to make sure that our program is doing what it should be, or if our program needs to make some sort of significant shift.
Thank you. And then again, a follow-up to the lands office from Patricia's question. I did want to ask, are there any infrastructure barriers that you all have identified into building out alternative sources, alternative projects that are away from the oil and gas industry? Are there whether it's transmission or siting issues, what are the barriers right now to other projects that are not oil and gas or extractive focused? So renewables.
Yes, sir, Chairman, I think you nailed it. Transmission is probably the key. hurdle right now. Even with Sunzia and Southline and some of the others that you've heard on, their capacity gets taken up very quickly. And we've actually had wind farms that have had to curtail their operations because there was lack of capacity on transmission lines. So that I would say is number one. And then just threading the needle and avoiding the other infrastructure and working with the other encumbrances that are on the land. Location challenges, I think you referenced, that would probably be a distant second to the lack of transmission.
Thank you. And then again, tribal consultation, I am certain that the lands office is experienced in that, but could you speak to it a little?
Absolutely. We adopted a new cultural properties rule about a year and a half ago. And so any tribe that requests consultation on any state land that is granted. I referenced community solar projects earlier in my remarks. We consult with Isleta Pueblo on any that are in an area that they've identified, basically Valencia County. And we'll do that for any project that any tribe or Pueblo has requested consultation on.
Thank you. I would love to follow up with you on what that process looks like. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, I didn't see any public comment in our participants. I'll check one more time. Is there anyone else who has a comment before we take a vote to adjourn? Okay, seeing none, I believe that will conclude us for today. So is there a motion to adjourn this meeting?
Move to adjourn, James.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, seeing none, we will conclude this meeting of the Sustainable Economy Task Force at 3:51 p.m. on August 29th, 2024. Thank you.